do what I try to do before our plenary address and do a little warm up, get the crowd ready, feeling in a good mood. Last year I had a really great stress dream I could share with everyone, but this year I didn't have a stress dream. So I don't have that to share. What I can do is talk about a couple of different approaches to change and try to steal Dr. Gillespie's thunder, but on a personal level, sometimes when we experience change, we decide we don't want that change. And we're going to fight back in resistance, and resist it. So you may have heard of sometimes when a friend or a loved one gets cancer and they're going to undergo radiation therapy and lose all their hair, that others might gather around them and decide, oh, I'm going to take my hair off too as a show of solidarity. We're going to fight this change together. Sometimes, by the way, that's not what hair is. Sometimes we decide we like the change, like, oh, you're going through an awful breakup and you're thinking, when I get through the other side of this, I'm going to be a new me. And you go and you change your hair. And that's not one of hair is different. On a more relaxed level, even something as simple as where you sit at a table for a meeting. How many people in the room are the folks who always sit in the same place at a meeting? And where are my agents of chaos who like to sit in different places to shake things up? So there's value in both approaches, right? There's the comfort and the familiarity of the sameness, and there's the unique perspective of being forced to move from your normal position. So as we talk about change today, my undergraduate degree is in English with a minor in philosophy. So of course, I'm going to try to solve every problem with words. So I wanted to give you a little bit of Stoicist Marcus Aurelius's thoughts on change. So philosophy of Stoicism says we try to minimize our reactions to the changes in the world around us and accept them as part of the natural order of things. And by reducing those reactions, we are able to more calmly and rationally assess the situation and think about what it means and what's next. So here we go. There once was a lady from our code. I do want to thank you for that limerick, Greg. Okay.
Sorry, I misread the room. My bad.
So Marcus Aurelius said, we shrink from change. Yet is there anything that can come into being without? What does nature hold dearer or more proper to herself? Could you have a hot bath unless the firewood underwent some change? Could you be nourished if the food suffered no change? Is it possible for any useful thing to be achieved without change? Do you not see then that change in yourself is the same order and no less necessary to nature? And with that, I will call to the front of the room our acting dean of Student Success Center, Dr. Michael Gillespie.
So everybody get to do the QR code? Okay, I'm gonna turn this thing off and use my teacher voice. That's all right. Getting some feedback from the computer here too. I'm gonna try that. All right. So thanks everybody for coming and just as we get warmed up here, one of the things Danny asked me to do this, and he walked into my office, and I was 3 weeks into the job. And he goes, so you want to give the keynote at the advising symposium? I said, sure. So what do you want me to talk about? He goes, I'll get back. A week later, he comes in and he goes, how about change management? I said, okay. And then I thought to myself, okay, he's either sizing me up or he's setting me up for something here. I'm going to trust that this is a setup. But he's put a lot of work into this, and I'm glad that everyone is in this room, and thanks to everybody who's contributed or will be contributing later on today for this as well. So I'm super appreciative to be able to have this opportunity. So, I'm gonna talk about change management, as Daniel alluded to, as we opened up, this morning, your theme. But also there's a lot of things happening around us all at this time. And so, it's not just about managing change in structures and organizations, but a lot also about managing ourselves through change and how we can work with others through change as well. And so I hope by the time we get done with this, you'll be able to see a little bit about the approach that we're working through in student success, but really an idea to think through how to manage change as it were, and as it's coming. So with no further ado, let's get into it. So the agenda for today, I gotta talk about some data first. Anybody knows me knows how much I love data. And so happy to talk about that. Some that we don't know yet, because for those of you who have clicked on the QR code and answered some of those questions, we're going to look at some of those. But then there's going to be some familiar data as well, which is helpful with the setup for the purpose of the feed today. And so, anybody get the reference? Okay, all right, good. Don't worry about that. And then we're going to talk about the triangle, which, spoiler alert, is the strongest geometric figure.
Yes.
All right, yeah. So we're going to talk about that and then finish up with answering a question, hopefully about why. So bear with me here, because to get these things up, I'm going to have to go through and change. Okay. You know what? We're just going to pass over that because we're gonna have to do a whole account sign in for the data that you did, but don't worry, we'll be able to do that. Didn't even think about that. And so instead of you watching the Duolingo cycle here, we're just gonna move past a little bit, but there'll be time to talk a little bit about some of your responses. So I apologize for that. Wasn't even thinking about that as we're getting the owl up and going. But I wanted to start with a question. Have you heard the one about the demographic cliff? Danny said if I didn't put in a couple of dad jokes that I was gonna get yanked off the stage. And I definitely didn't want to get yanked off the stage. And so, but have you heard the one about it? Right? It's what everybody is talking about these days, and it's certainly real. We know we're already facing it in the state. We're feeling it, its effects here. We'll look at that just in a minute, but you know, this is the sort of trend line that everybody is really concerning themselves with. The fact that this is from the EAD, that by the year of graduation 2029, we're going to be down about 15% college going age. And that college going age is, of course, measured by high school seniors, which to me excludes a large number of potential students, and definitely students that we serve on our campus who are returning master's students, adult learners and things. But in terms of that traditional college age going group, this is the, when you say the cliff, this is definitely cliff-like, right? Much more so than the postman from Cheers, but now this is really what we are talking about. Not to dwell too much on that, but this is some of our own data, some of the recent data that we have from institutional research here at EIU. This I pulled right from the institutional research homepage. This is our first time full-time freshman enrollment over the past decade or so. And you can see a definite trend, but not quite as sharp as the trend that we saw within that EAD report, but we're also right at the tip of that cliff as well, right? So the expectation is that some of these numbers are going to go down and this trend line is going to do a little bit of a dip. So first time full time for the fall was 779 students. Does not include dual enrollment, of course. And then underneath is our 10th day numbers from the semester. So our semester 10th day compared to year-over-year averages. Again, does not include our high school dual credit, but we're down about 10%. If we look at head count, it's 8 and almost 9. If we look at FTEs, it's just over 10%. So we're looking at a 10% spring to spring change in our enrollment for our students. So is this news to folks? No? Okay, so we're all kind of understands the context a little bit, right? And it's just sort of what we're facing, right? And it's not just us, we know that it's institutions around the state, it's institutions around the country, and that's how demographics work and things that demographers study, but, you know, this is something that is now a change to be managed. And so, without further ado, I want to get into, some of the things that we're holding to talk about today. Right? You know, it's true. I figured that was good. You know, there's things that we can't change, right? Things that we can do to mitigate some of that, but there's things that we can't change. We can't change when other people have or have not decided to come to our institution. Okay? As much as we would like to have more and more of them, there's just some things we can't change. We can't change things like around the pandemic. We definitely, that was a big moment for all of us. You know, right now it's a beautiful day outside. It's been a beautiful week. We got seasonal change, but we know this is fall, spring. So if you've been around for a while, we know this is just a tease, probably tease 204. I would maybe suggest. Joanne Fabrics, I'm sorry. Everybody's really heartbroken about this. And of course, my hairline as well, the things I can't change. I'm not long for the world to go towards Danny's. In solidarity. So there's things we can't change. Now, accepting some of these things is definitely a hard part, right? And some things we don't necessarily know how to navigate that, but change is there. But the message that I hope to talk through today is it's not necessarily about the change, but the response to it. Okay? We're given a set of conditions a lot. I'm a social scientist, and my background is social work, and one of the things that we really look at is the environment around the person or the group, what it is that we're trying to impact, what we can control and what we can't control. And so a lot of it has to do with our response to the changes that are before us. And so that's really, if you get the nutshell, this is the big message of the day. So just to be transparent and clear, this is sort of the framework that I work from. You know, it's like I said, I'm a social scientist and a social worker, and I'm very much interested in talking about growth mindsets, right? Which is taking failures and making them into lessons, learning from mistakes instead of letting them drag us down. I talk a lot about this with my students. I teach a statistics class, and so you can imagine what that first day is like. We talk basically about these four things, and I introduce them to my students because the anxiety is palpable, right? Much more palpable than some of the truths that you have there. I love data, but not just quantitative data. Kind of known as that stats guy, but I'm a mixed methods person. My dissertation was both qualitative and quantitative, so I like information that we can get from anywhere that's really going to help out the cause and help us to see paths to go, decisions to be made, impacts that can be created. One of the big parts of how I do work and how we're working within student success is that relationship-rich building type of thing where, you know, you see like that meme all the time, you know, this meeting could have been an email, right? You know what I'm talking about? Well, sometimes those meetings are meant for more than just, you know, presenting information. And the thing that I loved when everybody was coming in here this morning is that nobody sat down. You all saw each other and you started, oh, hey, I want to ask you about this student. Oh, I haven't seen you in a long time. Everybody's really happy for Tania, right? So everybody's talking to her. And so like, that's the stuff. That's the real awesome stuff that you want to see. And that's what relationship-rich type of change is, that you build those relationships and the relationships will help you carry forward. And so that was just, it was beautiful to be able to see that. And then having it be human-centered. We are a human service. I read something the other day that talked about us having to realize that education is a business and it's a business model, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think education is a human service, and we're in an empowerment business, and we're to work with students and continue their growth and to get them going to the paths that they want to travel on and to get them to what their definitions of success are. And so we have to remember that we are working as humans with humans. And so a lot of this is going to be that interaction, that relationship between humans as well. So this is a bit of my framework. So one of the questions that was on that slide, or on the quiz, was about what changes you have seen recently in your role. And I wanted to spend a little bit and talk about that because I think it's really important to hear the types of things that you're going through. We can talk about big, seismic shifts in demography and those types of things, but I'm really interested in hearing about some of the things that you are experiencing as changes in your role. And on the little survey was 3 or 4 words. But if anybody's comfortable or wants to just, talk about something real fast, what are you experiencing now within your role at EIU that are changes that you're having to navigate? And our online folks too, Danny, if anybody shares, please do add that.
I would say changes in how we have been having to do the freshmen.
Okay, all right, so freshman orientation has changed, for sure. Okay, others?
I think just the mental, struggles that our kids have.
Okay.
We're seeing more and more of that, so it's not just doing classes, it's also making sure that they're handling things correctly.
Sure.
They're more on the council. I mean, it's just been just a lot of that, or just not, here are your classes, but how are you doing? How are you handling things? What, they're worried about a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to kind of just talk through that, talk about what, the role that they're getting into as an adult is going to be and how that role may be changing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, students have changed, right? The students, when I started here 15 years ago, are a lot different than now. And 15 years isn't a lot of time, and the mental health crisis is definitely something that's real. Students, their emotional well-being is as important as their academic well-being because they over, right? So, so that's a really good one too. How we get them started, right, Carrie, with orientation, the types of messages they're starting with. Other examples of things that you're navigating, changes that you're navigating. Yeah, please.
I've noticed, of course, we always do open houses and recruit visits and all those things, but definitely I feel like people talk to me a lot more, like, make sure you're promoting our grad program, make sure you're promoting this, so kind of more of an emphasis on that recruitment and how much role we play in that, and people I think now realize that he goes to all of them. I'm gonna go talk to her about that.
Sure, yeah, so the roles are expanding too, right? There's more that you're being asked to do, open houses and things, making more contacts, right? And so being a steward of the department or the program or the institution as well is becoming part of the role. So that's a big change, right? Academic advising is a very specific thing. Academic advising has codes and it has rules, there's professional organizations, it's a very specific thing, but now counseling is coming into that, right? So people are doing coaching, we have other expectations on that as well, but that's, as the portfolio begins to fill, those are shifts in your ability and sort of comfort level with your job, maybe a little bit. So with social worker, I wasn't trained as an academic advisor. I've done academic advising, but I haven't, been trained in that, but I can definitely sit down with a kid and talk about prices. So there's a lot of that balance there. Well, thanks for sharing. We'll come back to some of those here in a little bit. I was gonna have a really cool word cloud. So just use the imagination portion of it. So word cloud with all of your thoughts on there. Okay. So the types of changes, I think we also need to talk about, that there are generally 2 types. There's adaptive changes, right, where there might be small tweaks, or they might have to, there's a new form that we're going to use. Maybe there's another step in the process. The free health advising pathways is, I would see as one of those, but perhaps it could become a transformational change as well as maybe how business changes when we're doing advising. But those are the little things that oftentimes go unappreciated or undiscovered because they usually happen within a small group. They don't happen with everybody. And so those are important changes. And the reason that they're important is because they keep things moving forward, right? In those little increments. The transformational change are the big impacts, like a demographic cliff would be a big transformational change. Thinking about, we're now going to be looking for a new provost, that's a big change that we're going to have to navigate. Anything that departs from the status quo in a way where that status quo is gone is generally seen as a type of transformation change. So you might be thinking in your head right now, okay, what kinds of these things these transformational changes have we gone through, right? And the types of experiences that we might have had with them. Any offers of suggestions about any transformational changes we sort of as a university or even as our advisors across campus have witnessed recently?
You coming into our class.
Well, thank you. I wasn't fishing for anything, but I appreciate that. I'm thinking, broader, thinking like curriculum changes or perhaps, personnel is definitely one of them, but anything else that you've seen across campus and big transformation changes? COVID,
Really recent, but
Yeah, that.
Sure. yeah, COVID definitely changed a lot, yeah, and when students started coming back, and faculty started coming back, and staff started coming back, it was different, right? Those relationships, how people were doing their jobs, were different. How people wanted to do their roles, perform, right? And we keep coming back to the pandemic as we do, but we're gonna be in this world for a bit because of the students that we're getting when they're coming from high school into college who have experienced the pandemic. That is gonna be around for a while, right? And that's gonna continue to be not just transformational, but we're gonna keep doing some tweaks on it, right? And adapting this up, that down, trying to figure out what's gonna work for this group, that sort of thing. So these are the big changes that often bring down, oftentimes out of our control, right? The pandemic definitely wasn't in our control, but we have to manage that. We have to figure out who we are within that process and the types of things that we want to do and that we want to be. The other types of changes that I also want to, here's the book, The Great Upheaval, where the demographic, it's pretty, it's a good book. It came out a couple years ago. I'm not sure if folks have read this or not, but it circulated around. But if you haven't, I would highly suggest it because as we talk about this cliff in the years to come, it's a pretty good book that outlines not just the history of higher ed and how we got to this moment, but also things that we can do moving forward as well. And so it's a pretty good introduction to the topic, but also really, really well researched. But other changes that I think we also have to factor in are not just the small tweaks, they're not just these transformational changes, but also cultural change. And cultural change can do with anything about institutional policies and relationships to just how business is done and how we work with our students. Some of those changes are slow. Cultural changes generally are evolutionary instead of really impactful in a moment. But you can feel cultural changes over time because you can see, coming from the faculty side of it, we talk a lot about, when I was a student, right? When I was a student this, and when I was a student that, well, that's not culturally relative anymore because we students have changed, right? And so cultural changes shift and change over multiple decades, sometimes generations. And then, of course, there's personal change and how we change through the change process. And personal change might be changing jobs, might be getting a supervisor, might be having your role redefined, might be moving between colleges, might be moving on to a different institution, right? Sometimes that change management is how we enter ourselves into that, how it impacts us, but also how we impact what that change looks like and how we are able to do it. And so there's the big, picture types of changes, there's cultural, there's personal, but I think the last two are the ones that matter. The last two are really the ones that are going to have change either be successful or have its challenges, right? Maybe bigger challenges than we might expect. But these, to me, are what matter. If you can work and understand the cultures of where you're at and who you're working with, this would be us working with students, working with our peers across campus, working with our supervisors, working with the external relations as we're doing more. How to establish and feed that culture is going to be a big part about moving forward. And the other thing is to the person, right? Because we feel things deeply. We're human beings, and our job, and I'll speak for myself. As my job is a definite part of my identity, right? And even still teaching, I still get really nervous on class evaluation. Right? I get so super nervous about that. It's like the validation and everything always turns out all right, but it's the worst it's just like, I get sweaty, you know, I roll my sleeves up, it's always nervous, right? But I feel that those things personally. I had a conversation with a colleague a couple of days ago who caught a student cheating using AI. Totally showed me the stuff. I said, oh yeah, that's definitely it. And they were like, I'm personally trying to do this. And I thought that I built this really good. So we feel these things, and you might also feel that you're working with a student, you know, sitting at a table or across a desk or talking to them on the phone and trying to work them through it. It's just not happening. And you're like, oh, right? Like this is, what is it to feel that, right? That means you care, right? And that's a good thing. But it also is part of how you navigate the change process, right? If you didn't feel that, you know, there'll be some things to consider, right? You want to have that connection. So I would definitely come to the front where these things are editable, right? These are the things that we have to work with, and these are the things that matter. So what I want you to do is think about some of these questions that I have. Because when you enter yourself into a moment where you're changing, or when you're navigating change, whether you're a leader or you've been tasked with some things to do, these questions can help figure out where you're going to be in this process. Okay. For example, what changes can I control? Right? What can I actually have some influence or impact on? What changes do those look like? All right. So, you know, you might not have the ability to change an IGP, but you might have the ability to talk to people who have the ability to make recommendations to change an IGP, for example, right? You might not have the ability to go through and change an entire program's curriculum, but you definitely have an impact on that, and you can have a voice from the students and from your experience to be able to do those things. So how can you insert yourself into the changes that are happening and thinking about the changes as they're being made? Another thing is about where can you best serve? Where do you fit in? What's your skill set, right? Where do you fit into that change process? And some people are really great at perhaps like being a reporter, taking notes, doing those minutes. There are those people who actually do like that, I've been told. And so that could be a position for that. But there's also folks who really like to take a steering committee or take a subcommittee and do some kind of work on a certain project. And so what are you willing to do? Where can you insert yourself to be a part of that change process? What will you contribute, right? People can have different skill sets, different comfort levels. We see that with our students. We see that when we work with colleagues, and people have comfort levels that are different, doing different things. So what's your strengths, right? What are things that you want to grow with, perhaps, and try something new as you're working through this? And then who are you bringing with you? Because this work isn't done alone. So who's your team? Who's your ally? Right? Who's your group that you want to be your squad and say, okay, I think we can have some impact here. Let's come together and figure out what that looks like, right? Bring people with you, because that's where the work is done. And the thing that I love about some of these questions are that they're active, right? You're thinking about what can I do, not what happens, right? Not what the problem is, but we understand that there's a problem. We understand that there's going to be a change. So what can we do about it, right? How can we grow from this? And where can we go? Well, one last question that I do like is, how will I respond, right? What is my response going to be? Because again, you can't control the environment, right? You can't control some of these big seismic transformative changes, but you can control the response. And that response is going to be key. Right? That response is going to be an inward look at who you are as an individual and position on campus, within your units, within your colleges, within your departments. How are we going to respond to this? And getting people on board, bringing your people in, asking some of those questions are going to help set you up. I would argue that a good response would be like, let's see what we can do. All right, let's take this up. You can't change the world, but what part of our world can be changed? And looking at that as opportunities to do some of this work and learn from those challenges. So, any questions so far? Good. So finally, the triangle. All right. So a really quick story. When I was an undergrad, the last class I had to take for my sociology degree, it was an organizational sociology class. And we had to do a complete project on an organization. And I chose a YMCA camp that I worked at the time. I ran a different leadership program for high school teens, but then I would go work in the summertime and was a counselor and director, so on and so forth. So I have that Y camp background. And one of the things that was happening at the camp I was working at is that they were building these really large, modern facilities that had bathrooms inside each of the cabins, and there was some ADA compliance, which was perfect, and that was all built into there. But the old timers at the camp would, generation after generation, their families grew up here, they spent their summers there, loved all those old rustic A-frames and that sort of thing, and they were really upset about it, right? Because all these beautiful modern buildings. So I started interviewing some of the directors at camp and some of the board members, and I got down to it, and it was basically an effort to respond for the camp was gonna die, the camp was gonna go away. And the response was to the stakeholders who were donors and other folks, like, we need some modern facilities because we want to be able to come out, but we also understand the limitations of maybe our mobility, or we want our kids to have a different environment. And so there was people saying, this is what we want the camp to be. There were the old timers who were saying, we want it to be the old way. And the response was a two-directional response. We had to respond to what the market was saying and what the folks who were really funding the camp wanted you to do. And then the staff and the old timers were there, and they had to have that same response, but they didn't get that. They didn't get the response, which is, here's why we're doing this, right? They didn't get that explanation about the changes coming, and here's why we have to do it, right? The enrollment was down at camp. It might sound familiar. This was a long time ago, but people weren't coming to camp as much because the facilities didn't meet the expectations. And so I always hung on to that as something you have to respond or die. And it's pretty black and white at that point, but I always thought it was important. And then as I went and did my master's degree in public policy and program evaluation, I learned this model about when you're designing programs and you're influencing change, that this triangle model involves the three things that really matter. People are at the base, the process that you're going to go through to manage that change, and then how you prepare for that change, right? How you prepare your colleagues, the people who you supervise, the students that you work with. That preparation is as important as the process and is as important as the people. So I chose, well, the triangle works pretty easily for this because of some very nerdy reasons. And again, I'm not going to get into a lot of that. But it is the strongest geometric shape, right? You can't change it unless you're going to actually alter the shape. So an isosceles triangle that has all the angles the same. You make one change to this, the whole structure of it disappears. Okay, and so it has that. It's a minimal design, but has the maximum integrity, which I really like. When you put a series of triangles together, it's called a truss. That's where the word truss comes from. And so that load distribution helps out when you align some of these together. And so it is a foundation for a complex set of structures. But what I really like about it is the concept of triangulation. Maybe heard the word before, triangulation. Got a couple, you nod your head. All right, now you're on the spot, sir. What's triangulation? Don't remember what it is. Okay, good. Anybody else want to give a stab?
Navigation thing, you take this distance, that distance, and figure out.
It's a good guess. It's not quite that. It's a way that you would make sure that if you have gaps in any information or any part of a process, you triangulate it to make sure that you get those gaps filled. So, for example, if we're learning about, say, a program and we want to collect some data on it, you can get some enrollment figures. You can look at maybe some historical trends. You can do some things, but one of the big pieces we often miss is the voices of the stakeholders. So you want a well-rounded system where you're actually able to get 3, 4, 5 different data points that really bring home what it is that you're trying to do, right? So triangulation in the research world has to do with making sure that you have data sources that will triangulate or back up the point in different ways, kind of fills that gap. And then there's the symbolic part of it, which I really like. This is the complete nerd, end of me, but this is also a triangle, but anybody know what else it is?
Delta, which means change.
Delta, right? It's the Greek letter delta, right? Which means change. It's used in science formulas and mathematics formulas that have to include the fact that something is going to change, right? And so the triangle is, well, a nice stable thing, but it's also recognized as a symbol for what are we going to do to instill or improve or include change in this process. And so I kind of like that. So let's talk first about the people aspect of this. And the people aspect of this, of course, has to be human-centered. Talk a lot about the role orientation and how people feel valued. And believe it or not, when people feel validated and heard, they tend to be more creative, they tend to be more resilient, they tend to be like, you are welcoming them into a process. So we're working with students, welcoming them into that process, with our peers, welcoming them in, like make a partnership with people. And it has to be authentic. I don't know if everyone's catching the little fine print down at the bottom of some of these. Danny said I have to reach this. But it has to be authentic, right? With the how you work with people, like when you are talking to a person and it's less than authentic, you kind of feel like you're getting the short change a little bit. And that has to be part of the process. It has to be true. And it has to be authentic. And to me, this looks like things like professional development, right? You want to make sure that you are giving them skills and tools to be able to do things that they need to accomplish or that you would need them to accomplish. And so in a change environment, it's making sure that you're raising that floor for them, so that they have the skills and the abilities to do the jobs that are going to need to do. In professional development, when I was the director of FDIC, that's what we did. That's where we lived, and we could see just the impacts that made on people, just to have the ability to learn some new skills, put some new sets. But in an environment like this, having that support becomes imperative. So finding opportunities for professional development for yourself, for your supervisor, for your students, ways to get and build some competencies. But it's also an acknowledgement that people feel change differently, that we all do not experience the same phenomena the same way. We talk about sometimes in the social world, social work perspective, how someone can go through the same exact traumatic experience and having two completely different outcomes from that. So we have to appreciate that there's a range and variation to how humans actually experience some of this. And so one of the key questions in this model is, how do we create that psychological safety for people to be vulnerable? We're asking you to change. We also have to give you a safety net so that you can step out and actually go ahead and try and attempt to make that change. So what are we doing to help support the people that are doing the work with us to feel safe to take a challenge? And back to my camp days, we used to call it dare to suck, right? It's okay to do something bad. It's okay to suck because we're going to back you up, and then we're going to lift you up, and we're going to keep moving forward, right? And so having the permission for vulnerability is also part of the model. In terms of the process has to be a process that serves the people, not just the people doing the work, but the people who are actually the target of that intervention. And so it has to serve that. And in a way that reduces cognitive load. And what I mean by that is, if you're being asked continually to do things as part of a change process, and you haven't heard that before, or it's seemingly a new process for you every time you talk about it, you're continually having to go in and evaluate that, and you're continually having to make decisions. But a well-designed process reduces that anxiety that the process is going to change on a whim. And so there's a lot of work that goes into how you prepare and design and work on these things. Growth mindset is important. Flexibility is so important in iterative changes, right? So you have benchmarks for when things can happen, but of course, being transparent and accountable through the whole process too, so that people can have time for feedback, have time to grow, but you're also able to give that to folks as well. I think you could probably see some of this with like degree plans, right? And working with students and the types of things that they might have to make some decisions on, or pivot and obscure them in certain ways or another. Yeah, I worked with a student last week who came in and said, I don't know what to do with my last semester because I got all these credits I have to fill, but I'm already done with all my, program majors. And I was like, this is an ideal opportunity for you. So like, this is great. And she's like, I got so worried about it. I'm like, look at all these different opportunities you can have. And just having someone say, yes, but here's the plan. It's like, okay, you know, it totally removed that from them. And so it's really helpful. But allowing for mistakes, I think, is important. Allowing for those dare to be suck moments when something might not work all the way. Learn from it, grow from it, and then build that back into the system. That's the change, that's the delta part of this. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's what you do with them that really matters at the end. And so a key question to this is, how can our processes become laboratories for learning rather than compliance exercises, right? Are we doing this to further something, or are we doing this and sticking to the way things have been done because that's the way things have always been? All right, give me the, how many minutes I got left? 10? All right, good. So, and then the prepare part, I think is, well, I think all of them are important, but the prepare part is really key because you have to get people ready. You have to understand that, you know, a new major is coming online, for example. We're going to have Bachelor's of Social Work program. There's lots of students who are interested in that. And even though the program hasn't been fully approved yet, we're pretty confident that it's going to happen. And so we can start preparing students who are interested in that program now, for example. So you can build both mindset and action into that, right? Let's look forward and kind of see what's coming down the road, build those things in. Like I said, professional development is so important because I think professional development helps, and Danny and the rest of the leadership team and student success all the time about just raising that floor. We can't raise the bar without raising the skill set for folks to achieve that bar, which takes effort, which takes strategy, it takes money, it takes commitment. And part of that process is really focusing in on what the specific needs and the importance is for that. Stakeholder specific, right? So we have different sets of stakeholders that we work with. You are all stakeholders with your peers, but your stakeholders in that relationship with students that you are serving, your stakeholders to the institution. And so change has to include the preparation for different sets of stakeholders as well, right? However, the board of trustees might see something versus how students see something are going to be different, but it could be the same exact change. And so you have to be able to prepare those. Curating relationships, of course, I talked about that, just how important it is to make those connections and to be allowed to innovate, right? To do things that are going to be novel, that might be I don't like the outside of the box. I like to say outside of the workshop. I'm thinking we're actually can do some different processes and different things, but innovation should be encouraged here as well. So preparation creates space for agency, creates space for people to become involved. And so I started off with those questions about here, how can I insert myself? What are the things that I can do? How can I contribute to this? But the preparation has to also allow for that, right? It's hard to say, step up and say, I want to do something. And then the process and the preparation that's been provided has been, well, we don't need that, right? Bringing people in and allowing for their skills and their abilities and their interest in that process is important in the preparation. So are we preparing people to be passive recipients of change or co-creators? And that agency and that co-creation part is really where then people get involved. People are engaged. There's not just agency, but there's accountability, and it helps people come in and really take ownership of something that's going to be a large scale shift, right? It's going to be really part of that transformative changes that we have talked about. So I like to see all three of these things work together, right? All three of these different pieces of this change management model come together. You have to prepare people for the process, right? Get them ready, be transparent, make sure that they see and can appreciate what's happening. Then people have to prepare for the process, right? There has to be time to get them ready, make sure that the skills are there, make sure that they have the ability to understand what's going to happen. And so a lot of sharing, meetings. But the process also prepares people because when that change is over and it happens, those people are still going to be there on a daily basis, doing their jobs, now implementing what has been designed. And so the whole triangle will just go around and around, where all three of these continue to connect to each other. And the triangulation part is where if one of these breaks down somewhere or might have to be tweaked a little bit, the other pieces will pick that up, and then now we have to ship, right? So the process prepares people, people prepare the process, and then the people prepare the process, and then the process prepares people. I want to make sure that we have a few minutes to ask and answer some questions before we're done, but we're almost there. Here's the fine print. People part, it works both ways. That buy-in is not just an invitation, but it's the authentic buy-in as well. That it's not just creating the space, but when you take up that space, is doing it for the reason that you want to be part of that change and part of that group who's actually doing that. And so this goes with the process as well. As the process serves people, people serve the process. As the people prepare, that is also built into this as well. So the key, right, those changes, the heart and the cultural part of this, the personal and the cultural part of this has to be a two-way street. People have to be invested, they have to be invited to be invested, and then with that authentic participation. So before we get to the questions, I just wanted to put this up. This is a quote by Simon Sinek, right over here. His name, he wrote a book about finding your why and finding the purpose of what it is that you're doing. And he said, we know why we do what we do, everything falls into place, right? So like the story I told you about the Y camp that I used to work at, the people who worked there had a hard time with the changes because they were never explained why. They were never given the opportunity to engage in that process. But when that happens, and we invite people in and prepare them and create a process that serves, then everything falls into place. But when that doesn't happen, it's sort of like pushing things into place. And oftentimes it's putting a square peg in a round hole, for example. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of work to get that in there. More work than is usually necessary. So the why is the central thing. So with that, I'm gonna say thank you and see if anybody has any questions. We got minutes left, right? 5 minutes, 4 minutes. All right, so we got 4 minutes for questions.
Okay, what is the why makes no sense?
What if the why makes no sense? For instance,
Orientation.
orientation. So what are we doing about that process? What can we do about that process, right? So the orientation,
Not have to be this whole triangle.
right? So what's happening is not the whole triangle. So how can we put this triangle together for that? I don't know, right? That's a big question. That's something that we're definitely working on. But does it, I would say, have to be within the same process that is already existing? Can there be cohabitating orientations, for example, where advising happens and student success center things happen so that they get those time built in to have those authentic experiences? It's like thinking outside of what is to push things forward might not necessarily have to be part of that same process.
Can you discuss the changes that are gonna be happening with advising across campus? Folks will be moved around to different departments to facilitate less faculty advising and more professional advising.
So the changes that are gonna be happening across campus, as far as I know, the changes that are gonna happen are gonna help facilitate getting students into their areas sooner. And so that the process there will start. The things that have been discussed, nothing has been fully finalized, but there are proposals on the table to get students into their academic areas sooner and be able to meet with professional advisors in those areas. Part of that is also building up the professional development with advisors across campus as well. And so that our advising center will have the opportunity to provide professional development for folks across campus, something like a symposium, but maybe even more regular to make sure that any kind of implementation that could happen will be one that is also supported so that the people who are having to navigate these changes will be part of that process and have the ability to have some impact. Thanks. Appreciate it. There's plenty of and all that stuff. Thanks for coming.
Dr. Gillespie, we have a question from the chat.
Okay.
So Dr. Doolabom asked, how do we address different perspectives on why among the people? I think that kind of builds off the question that Jennifer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you have different whys, there's a table for that, there's a discussion that should be made. In an institutional context, right, we have a strategic. It seems like the easy answer, but I think some of that also comes when there's not any other places. That is strategic, that brings people to the table to have the authentic conversation. So you have to be able to open yourself up to listen to other people's whys, because that can impact your understanding of where they're coming from and vice versa. So you have to ask that question. It's a great.